душе моя Господа, благословен єси, Господи, благослови, душе моя Господа, і вся внутрішня моя, ім'я святое Його.
Good evening, everyone. We have a presenter this evening, Father John Ford. He is Professor of Theology and Religious Studies and coordinator of the Hispanic Latino programs at the Catholic University of America here in Washington, D.C. After receiving a bachelor's degree in philosophy and mathematics at the University of Notre Dame, he earned a master's degree in theology at Holy Cross College in Washington, D.C., and then a licentiate and doctorate in theology at the Gregorian University in Rome. His current areas of teaching and research include contemporary ecumenism and ecclesiology, revelation and faith, Hispanic ministry, and 19th century theology, with a special interest in the thought of John Henry Newman. He served for a decade as the editor-in-chief of Newman Studies Journal and is area editor for Liberation Theology for Religious Studies Review. He has a remarkable background in ecumenical affairs. He served as president of the North American Academy of Ecumenists, as a member of the United Methodist Roman Catholic Dialogue, a consultant to the Reformed Roman Catholic International Commission, as an observer consultant for the Consultation on Church Union, Churches Uniting in Christ, and a member of the Faith and Order Commission of the National Council of Churches. And he is currently chair of the Ecumenism Committee of the Washington Theological Consortium. In 2014, he was presented with the Paul Watson Christian Unity Award by the Franciscan Friars of the Atonement. And he will be speaking to us this evening on ecumenical ecology and ecological ecumenism. So please welcome Father John Ford.
There is a handout available, so hopefully it will facilitate your following the lecture. At least if it doesn't facilitate following the lecture, it will give you kind of a time frame of how much longer the lecture is going to last. I'd like to begin by expressing my appreciation to Jack for the invitation to participate in this 20th Orientale Lumen Conference. Particularly of interest to me is the theme, creation or shared inheritance. And this resonates very well, first of all, and obviously, with last year's encyclical by Pope Francis, Laudato Si. But it also resonates very well with roughly a quarter century of encyclicals and addresses by the Patriarch of Constantinople. Unlike some encyclicals, which have tended to be rather stodgy, if I can put it that way, the encyclicals and addresses of Patriarch Bartholomew have gained the backing of prominent people like Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and simultaneously, Laudato Si has sparked wide-ranging interest. My favorite example of interest in Laudato Si is the fact that, of all places, the California State Senate voted a resolution asking Congress and asking the President to consider the message of Laudato Si. My own reading of Laudato Si, when it came out, reminded me of an invitation from a cousin some years ago. He invited me to a jazz brunch with 99 lunch items. I must confess that my appetite only could manage about 8 or 9 of the items before I realized that I would have to have a number of more brunches before I could even begin to appreciate the menu. I have a similar feeling in reading Laudato Si. Its 246 paragraphs provide plenty of food for thought. Indeed, too much to digest at a single sitting. At the outset of Laudato Si, Pope Francis seemingly acknowledges the, if you will, abundance of ideas that come into his encyclical. He mentions 10 major items, and they're listed on the handout. Relationship between the poor and the fragility of the planet. Interconnection of everything in the world. New technology-derived paradigms and forms of power. Seeking other ways to understand economy and progress. The value of each creature. Human meaning of ecology. Need for honest debate. Serious responsibility of policy, not only local, but international. And our throwaway culture. A throwaway culture in which we not only discard things, but we discard people and we ignore nature. We consider these things disposable. And finally, a proposal of a new lifestyle. Each of these 10 themes could well be a study, if not a book, in itself. Yet, what seems to me most important is each of these 10 themes is related, is linked to the encyclical's point of departure. A single, succinct, yet solitary statement reminding us, while admonishing us, the earth is our common home. And yet, woven throughout the encyclical is this hesitancy, is this warning that when it comes to taking care of our common home, far too many of us have failed to be good housekeepers. What have we been? We have been negligent tenants, ungrateful guests, dishonest managers, disruptive squatters, and sometimes greedy plunderers, heedless of the damage we have done, heedless of the damage we are doing, and unless we change, we will continue to damage the planet. As Patriarch Bartholomew remarked in the message that he gave at the University of Oregon in 2009, quote, "While we often refer to an environmental crisis, the real crisis lies not in the environment itself, which suffers the consequences of our actions, but in the human heart. The fundamental problem is to be found not outside, but inside ourselves, not in the ecosystem, but in the way we think about, perceive, and treat this ecosystem." Utilizing that image of caring for our common home, one might say that Laudato Si attempts on a mega scale what that magazine, Good Housekeeping, has been trying to do for over a century, encouraging American homeowners to promote effective home management for a wholesome family life. What I'd like to suggest is that Laudato Si is encouraging us as planet owners to take better care of the single planet that we own and improve our planetary life. In the case of planet Earth, such good housekeeping has become the work of ecology, literally the study of the home, a term coined a century and a half ago by the zoologist Ernst Haeckel, who described ecology as the study of the relationship of organisms with their environment. In other words, then, one might envision Laudato Si as a user's manual for the wholesome life of all of us who dwell here on earth. Yet, as every homeowner all too well knows, good housekeeping can be easier said than done. The task of good housekeeping is ongoing, continual, multifaceted, complicated. And one can enumerate at least a half dozen factors that should be considered for good housekeeping around the home. Aesthetics, appearance of the house, architecture, the structural soundness of the house, economics, how much does it cost? Not only the original investment, but the subsequent upkeep. Immunology. A home should be a healthy place to live. Politics and government. One's home should be a safe place to live. Sociology. Your neighborhood should be a congenial place to live. And I'd like to suggest that all 6 of those factors also should be part of our good housekeeping of planet Earth, part of our maintenance of the planet in which we live. Yet unfortunately, poor housekeeping, sometimes accidental, sometimes intentional, has rendered a good deal of our planet aesthetically ugly, environmentally unsound, economically unproductive, unsanitary and contagious, dangerous and unsafe, overcrowded and basically inhumane. And when such disasters happen in our home, what do? We either repair it, we tear it down, or we move someplace else. However, when disasters affect our planet, where else can we move? We have only one home here on Earth. And that is why ecology is so important. It's why ecology is no longer simply local or national. Ecology has become a universal concern, universal and ecumenical concern. And consequently, my first point is one then needs to speak of a universal ecology, one needs to speak of an ecumenical ecology. And this universality of the environmental crisis is evident in numerous statements of scientists, scientific organizations, political representatives, government agencies, religious leaders, Episcopal conferences, and so on. And yet, as Patriarch Bartholomew remarked in one of his addresses, ecumenical is a worldview, is a way of life. And consequently then, the question that I'd like to focus on is how can this complex of ecological problems be addressed ecumenically? There is then need to consider how one has gone about ecumenism in the past and how one might go about addressing the environmental crisis ecumenically in the future. Traditionally speaking, in the 20th century, there were 2 major approaches to ecumenism: faith and order, life and work. Faith and order has had considerable success, but as the title Faith and Order indicates, its focus was on resolving doctrinal issues and seeking the reconciliation of divergent church structures. And in that process, one has considerable achievement. For example, in regard to church structures, there have been a number of very significant church unions and even more church agreements for sharing pulpit and altar fellowship. But at the same time, Faith and Order has not really taken up the, so to speak, first article of the Nicene Constantinople Creed. And that is our belief, our common belief in God as creator of heaven and earth. Right? The second area of approach, life and work. Life and work has been concerned with a variety of economic, cultural, political, and social problems on local, national, and international levels. And in particular, the Commission on Justice, Peace, and Creation of the World Council of Churches has begun to address the problems raised by environmental issues. But I'd like to suggest a new approach in the ecumenical world, and that has been called, quote, unity in mission, unquote. And this particular ecumenical strategy, this particular ecumenical methodology proposes a pilgrim journey together, encourages Christians to walk together, to work together, even though not all doctrinal divergences, not all ecclesiastical differences have been resolved. And even though there are significant economic, cultural, political, and social issues that are still unresolved. As mentioned this morning, the strategy and methodology of unity and mission seems particularly appropriate for an ecological ecumenism. An ecological ecumenism that might well utilize that three-stage process: see, judge, and act. And that's going to be basically the heart of the rest of my remarks. See, an ecological vision that is biblical-based, theologically attractive, that entices people to see the dire straits in which the environment finds itself. Secondly, judging, an ecumenically and ecologically motivated spirituality. And third, it's all well to have visions, it's all well to make good resolutions. How is one going to implement that vision and those resolutions? I'm only going to suggest one active implementation. But first of all, the biblical theological vision. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, to me the obvious, if not obligatory, place to begin forming an ecological vision, a holistic view of the world in which we live, is the creation account in the book of Genesis. This is a scriptural text that can bring Christians together, bring the Jewish community into dialogue with the Christian community. Genesis describes God as the artisan of the universe, the artisan who has created the planet on which we live. And regardless of one's denominational affiliation, readers have been perennially fascinated by the literary beauty, the theological depth, the spiritual insight of the Genesis accounts of creation. And even some people who have little or no formal religious affiliation many times are captivated by the poetic drama of Genesis. Popular, of course, there is no unanimity in interpreting Genesis. And so you have a very wide range of interpretations of Genesis. ranging from the very literalistic people who understand Genesis as creation, 6 days, 24 hours each. And on the other hand, you have the more imaginative interpretations of Genesis that see this as a creation ballad, as a chorizo, as a popular narrative song. But it seems to me that people looking at Genesis might agree on 3 basic points. And these 3 basic points might well serve as the basis for an ecumenical ecclesiology and ecumenical ecology. 3 points, and I'll make some comments under each one. Creation is good. 2, human beings are created in the image and likeness of their Creator. And 3, human beings are responsible for God's creation. First of all, in regard to the goodness of creation, look at the first chapter of Genesis. That's a theme that keeps getting repeated. Genesis characterizes half a dozen different aspects of divine creation as good, starting with verse 4. Light is good. Earth and sea are good, verse 10. Plants are good, 12. The luminaries of day and night, verse 18. Swimming creatures and winged birds, verse 21. Animals, verse 25. And then not only are these creatures all designated as good, creation in its entirety is described as, quote, very good, unquote. Patriarch Bartholomew remarked in an address a dozen years ago, quote, this factor in the relationship of both humanity and the environment is the creator of both humanity and the environment, who provides for all and has laid down the laws of harmonious coexistence of all elements in the universe, both animate and inanimate, endowing humankind with the mandate to serve as king of creation and the command to cultivate and preserve it. And yet, one has to admit, not all parts of creation are good. There are numerous examples of evil, discordance in creation. There are all sorts of features that suggest anything but divine wisdom and love. My favorite example for those who are familiar with Charles Darwin, the thing that upset him was the fact that there are parasitic wasps in the world. And these parasitic wasps lay their eggs in caterpillars. And he thought, how can it be possible that there is a beneficent creator who would allow, if you will, such a travesty of one species taking example on another? How do people handle that? One way in handling such incongruities, such apparent evils in creation is by proverbs, right? 2 proverbs come to mind. Good can emerge from evil. No mal que por bien no venga. Or, if you prefer, God writes straight with crooked lines. Dios escribe derecho por linos tortas. Right? Proverbs. A common way of dealing with the mysteries of life, the incongruities of life, the discordances of life. In any case, the claim that creation is basically good seems defensible on the large scale. The details, one can find incongruities that are impossible to explain. Incongruities that seem inbuilt, even without any human malice. rather than ameliorate these inbuilt incongruities, what has humankind done? It's exasperated. It has exacerbated these difficulties. Okay? Second point from my biblical theological commentary. Human beings are created in the image and likeness of their Creator. In a certain sense, this is axiomatic. Think of the artisan. The artisan always leaves traces of himself or herself in their artwork. Example, see a painting in the National Gallery, immediately say, that is a Van Gogh, all right? A distinctive artistic style. And so it's not surprising to say that we creatures are created in the image and likeness of God. And stating that humans are created in the divine image and likeness, so to speak, means that each one of us are divinely trademarked. We're divinely imprinted with the divine design. Elizabeth Theatrikoff has written what to me is a wonderful theological description of the creative Logos, the incarnate Logos, and if I could put it this way, we as the human Logoi. And let me read that. It's on the handout. God comes into his world through one particular creature, the human being, formed in the beginning according to his image and likeness. So, at Christ's coming, members of the human race immediately recognize the affinity. Here is God with us. He is not just among us, like an ancient Greek deity paying a visit to the earth. He is part of our nature. And the beauty that he reveals in the nature is our own archetypal beauty, the original in whose image the human being was formed. Unquote. What is surprising, however, is the reluctance, even the deliberate refusal, of human beings to acknowledge this divine image and likeness in either their fellow human beings or in their fellow creatures. In effect, for better or for worse, our treatment of people tends to parallel our treatment of creatures and vice versa. In other words, then, the ecological crisis is part of a larger worldwide spiritual crisis. Can we expect concern for creation from people who are unconcerned about the welfare of their fellow human beings? Third point of proposed biblical theological consensus. Human beings are responsible for God's creation. This human responsibility is seen both in the first creation account of Genesis, where on the sixth day human beings are given, quote, dominion over all creatures, and in the second account, in speaking of, quote, naming the animals, unquote, that suggests human responsibility in caring for creation. At the outset, one might well note the timing of the creation. This is a little bit humbling. Both the beasts and the humans were created on the sixth day. Right? And sometimes we ignore our commonality with the beast. This is not to say that humans do not at times act like beasts, but it is to say that there is an interdependence between the creatures with whom we live, the creatures with whom we were created. I suppose that the key word is the word that is translated as dominion, but it can also be translated reign or rule, caretaking or taking charge, mastery or management, supervision or stewardship, and so on. In any case, the issue here is what has been called, quote, the dominion mandate, unquote. The supposed superiority of the human over the animal. In regard to the dominion mandate, 4 quick points. First of all, dominion is also interconnected with dependence, right? What do we have for supper tonight? We had the choice of fish or chicken, right? In other words, then, we are dependent for our food supply on other creatures. Number 2, in regard to mastery, many times when we use that word mastery, we think of master-servant or even master and slave. However, we also use mastery in another sense. And the sense of mastery is this particular person has mastery, for example, of a musical instrument such as the violin. And what does that mean? It means that the person has both considerable understanding and knowledge of the situation, and also the ability to use that particular talent in playing a musical instrument. What then does dominion mandate mean in terms of mastery? That we have an understanding of creation and we are able to use creation in a beautiful way. Number 3, in regard to dominion, many times we understand that as taking charge of creation. And sometimes that is like the custodian who very diligently goes about and cleans up the messes after the party. Right? However, instead of custodian, wouldn't we think of caretaker? In other words, a caretaker is a person who is careful about taking care of the goods that one has. And fourthly, I'd like to suggest management. Dominion is management, and sometimes we think in management of those entrepreneurs who make a profit for themselves, take a nice commission as well, but management might better be understood as ministry, as stewardship. People who are committed to caring carefully for the property entrusted to them. Ministry and stewardship imply both the service of God and dedication to the well-being of others. However one chooses to interpret dominion, one can find both positive and negative possibilities and understand the relationship between human and creature. One can find that mastery runs the risk of mismanagement. Caretaking runs the risk of malpractice. Dominion can easily become domination, and domination can easily result in extermination, such as happened to countless species. Patriarch Bartholomew, in an address that he gave in Kathmandu, Nepal in 2000, had this to say: in regard to the double responsibility of humans for creation, the first condition is the requirement to protect the gift, namely, to preserve nature harmless and to consume only its fruit. The second condition is the requirement not willfully to consume every fruit, but to be self-restrained and to abstain from certain fruits. Unfortunately, when it comes to good housekeeping, whether it's one's home or one's planet. Whatever is everyone's responsibility all too often ends up being no one's responsibility. And so I'd like to suggest that the Dominion mandate needs to be grounded in an ecumenical spirituality. An ecumenical spirituality that is individual and communitarian, personal and ecumenical. And so this is my second major point. And ecologically motivated spirituality. Again, I'd like to cite Patriarch Bartholomew, an address that he gave in 2005. Quote, "There is a close link between the economy of the poor and the ecology of the planet. Conservation and compassion are intimately connected. The web of life is a sacred gift of God, ever so precious and ever so delicate. We must serve our neighbor and preserve our world with both humility and generosity in a perspective of frugality and solidarity alike. After the Great Flood, God pledged never again to destroy the world. How tragic, however, it would be if we were the ones responsible for their destruction." In a parallel fashion, Pope Francis has pointed out a need for a passionate concern for the protection of our world. Our world cannot be sustained by doctrine alone. It requires an ecumenical conversion, whereby the effects of our encounter with Jesus Christ become evident in our relationship with the world around us. Pope Francis, calling to mind the figure of St. Francis of Assisi, emphasized that this conversion calls for a number of attitudes which together foster a spirit of generous care, full of tenderness, gratitude, and gratuitousness, and a loving awareness that we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, but join in a splendid universal communion. An awareness that each creature reflects something of God, each of us, created in the image and likeness of God. As Patriarch Bartholomew pointed out, in the Orthodox tradition, the connection between ecology and spirituality is especially tangible in the practice of asceticism. Without asceticism, none of us is authentically human. Patriarch Bartholomew went on to say, "The environmental crisis will not be solved simply by sentimental expressions of regret or aesthetic formulations of a creative imagination. It will not be altered by fashionable programs or ecumenical catchwords. It is the tree of the cross that reveals to us the way out of our ecological impasse by proposing the solution of self-denial, the denial of selfishness and self-centeredness. It is therefore the spirit of asceticism that in the final analysis leads to the spirit of gratitude and love, to a rediscovery of the sense of wonder and beauty." The ascetic tradition also offers us a celebratory use of the resources of creation. And he pointed to an absolutely marvelous example, an example that became only available in the 20th century. The beauty of creation in the Earthrise photograph taken in 1969 from the Apollo spacecraft. And it throws the entire planet sapphire blue and beautiful. No human being had looked at the planet that way before. Third and final point, an ecumenical celebration. Yes, there is need for implementing an ecumenical theology, an ecological spirituality in many ways. But the one way that I would like to suggest is celebration through prayer. And much needs to be done to improve the Earth's environment, theological reflection, spiritual ideals. These need to be symbolically expressed. And so the celebration of creation is an important means, an important reminder for making people conscious of the beauty of creation and to encourage people to prevent the destruction of the planet. In the Eastern tradition, September 1 has traditionally been the beginning of the Orthodox ecclesiastical year and an occasion for patriarchal encyclicals. In 1989, Patriarch Demetrios proposed that September 1 be celebrated as, quote, the day of the protection of the environment. That proposal was endorsed by his successor, Patriarch Bartholomew, who pointed out that September 1, for those who are residing in the northern hemisphere of our planet, September 1 is basically the beginning of autumn. And those in the southern part of the world, the beginning of spring. September 1 has been both an ecclesiastical significance and an ecological significance. Shortly after the publication of Laudato Si, and in a certain sense, this is an addendum to Laudato Si, Pope Francis wrote a letter to Cardinal Turkson, President of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, and to Cardinal Koch, President of the Pontifical Council for the Promotion of Christian Unity. We saw vignettes of welcome from both of those cardinals earlier today. Sharing the concern of my beloved brother, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, for the future of creation, and at the suggestion of his representative, Metropolitan Joannes of Pergamum, who took part in the presentation of the encyclical Laudato Si, I, Pope Francis, have decided to institute in the Catholic Church the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation, which beginning this year, 2015, is to be celebrated on the 1st of September, has been the custom in the Orthodox Church for some time. Pope Francis voiced his hope that the annual World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation will offer individual believers and communities a fitting opportunity to reaffirm their personal vocation to be stewards of creation, to thank God for the wonderful handiwork which He has entrusted to our care, and to implore His help for the protection of creation as well as His pardon for the sins committed against the world in which we live. Pope Francis also highlighted the ecumenical significance of this proposal. Quote, the celebration of this day on the same date as the Orthodox Church will be a valuable opportunity to bear witness to our growing community with our Orthodox brothers and sisters. And Pope Francis expressed the hope that other Christians would join in the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation. It should be noted, however, that a decade earlier, Patriarch Bartholomew, in an address in 2005, shared his vision of an ecological ecumenism. Quote, faith communities must undoubtedly first put their own houses in order. Their adherents must embrace the urgency of the issue. This process has already begun throughout the world, although it must be expanded and intensified. Religions realize the primacy of the need for change deep within people's hearts. They are also emphasizing the connection between spiritual commitment and moral ecological practice. Faith communities are well placed to take a long-term view of the world as God's creation. September 1, hopefully, will be a day of prayer that unites Christians with each other and Christians and people of other faith traditions to praise the Creator for the blessings of creation and to promise to renew the earth in a sustainable way. Hopefully, all people of good faith will join in the prayer of St. Francis. Laudato si mi Signore. Praise to you, my Lord.
Щедрий милостий Господь, до тебе рівно милости. Благослови, душе моя Господа, і вся внутрішня моя, ім'я святое Його, благословен єси Господь.